Welcome to the first episode, and I really hope that it is not last episode. So my today's and my first guest is Dillon Cardinale, my friend. He's a first year medical student in Creighton University School of Medicine in Phoenix, Arizona.
Yes. Thank you, Nikita, for having me. I'm excited to be here today. For those listening, Creighton University Medical School is a medical school that was originally started in Nebraska in the middle of the United States, like over 100 years ago. And then they just opened this campus 4 or 5 years ago.
We met like slightly more than 1 year ago, right? In Panama,
Yes.
back in Panama. I just
Good times.
came to Panama in September 2023 to start my work as a medical doctor. And Dillon was there like for 3 months at that time, right?
Yeah. I came in June and then I left in December. So you overlapped with about half of my Panama experience.
Yeah, and you was a pharmacy manager, and also you did everything else. So you were a Spanish English translator. You were like, I don't know, nurse. Everything you could do, you did it, and you did it perfectly. So,
thanks.
Yeah. So partially, I'm just excited to speak to you because, well, first thing is you're not an average medical student in the United States, I guess, because you have like a pretty interesting path, especially right after your college. So we will be talking about it a little bit later. And yeah, you did a lot of things between college and your study in medical school. So I found it particularly interesting. And also my idea of this podcast was like, I was just mulling over my usual thoughts. So back in my medical school, I heard many times, many teachers, professors mentioned, many people love to compare Russian medical schools with the American ones. One of the thoughts that I still remember that one of the professors said, like, we teach you at the bedside. For non-medical listeners, it's just like when you have a patient present, so you don't just study with your books or something, you also see patients, you contact with them. And the continuation of his thought was in the United States, they don't do that. They never see patients throughout their medical school. And I was like, what? So I know many things about residency because I'm into this process, but my genuine idea was always to know more about medical school in the United States because it's something that I can watch YouTube videos, but usually they don't cover these topics. What do you particularly do during medical school? So this is my idea. So, and basically we will talk about Dillon's journey to medical school and in medical school. So the first, could you share some information about you? Like, where are you from?
Yeah. I'm from Portland, Oregon on the West Coast. I was born and raised there. And then, as some of the listeners might know, in order to go to medical school in the United States, you have to first go to a undergraduate university and get a undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree. And so I did that up in Spokane, Washington, which is also on the West Coast, at a school called Gonzaga University. I studied biology for 4 years, always kind of with the intention that I would go on to medical school. But then, as has become more popular in the United States to take what they call a gap year, and sometimes it becomes 1-2 gap years. For me, it actually ended up being 4 gap years. Immediately after I graduated from my undergrad, the first thing that I did was take some time to study for the MCAT. And the MCAT is our entrance exam to get into medical school. It's a very challenging exam. It's made to be hard. People generally study anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on what other commitments they have going on at the same time. And so I took that pretty quickly after I graduated. The first job that I found, I graduated during COVID, so it was a tough job market. and I didn't get my first choice, but I actually ended up working as a chiropractic assistant. And Nikita knows this because, interestingly enough, the head chiropractor at our clinic is Russian. And over by where I live, we do have a significant Russian immigrant population. And so I think every single Russian or Ukrainian that lived in in our setting would come to our chiropractic clinics. I don't know, I can't remember anything.
Yeah. So I was surprised. It was probably in our first meeting with Dillon. So Dillon started to just saying some words in Russian. So I was like, what is going on? How do you know all these super random phrases? So yeah, this is an explanation.
Yeah. So from there, I was only there for a few months, and then I was lucky enough to get a job offer at a small surgical clinic. It was actually a vascular clinic, so they saw primarily patients with aggressive varicose veins that were leading to some venous stasis, so some swelling and some rashes on the legs. Sometimes they have ulcers in their legs, and then also managing blood clots in patients as well. And I worked there for about 2 years. And during this time was the first time that I was applying for medical school. So to apply to medical school in the United States, it's quite the endeavor. Obviously, like key things like you're going to have your CV with all of the experiences that you've done.
The vast majority of applicants, do they like at least try to go to the medical school right after a college, right after bachelor degree?
So I would say at this time in the US, it's about 50-50. The median age right now of starting medical school in the US, I think it's 24. So we have quite a few people that are taking at least a couple of gap years. It didn't used to be that way. I think that if you were to go back 30 years ago, the majority of people would be coming straight from their undergraduate. However, part of it is just due to the competitive ness in order to and part of it too is the medical school committees are prioritizing your CV more so than your undergraduate grades, more so than they used to in the past. And so in order to be competitive, how do you make your CV better? You spend more time outside of your undergraduate to get those experiences.
Okay, so speaking about you worked, you did a volunteering, right? Is it usual thing? Maybe you heard about someone who did something else like you've never heard before, or just
Yeah.
what people usually do in this gap year.
It varies a lot. Some popular things I would say the two most popular things are scribing. Doctors in the US, not everybody, but
They
because
cannot
of
write.
increased documentation demands and a medical students who or pre-medical students that want to get into medical school, they basically hire them straight out of undergraduate with little to no training and then say, all right, you can take the notes for me. That's a popular one because you're getting in the room with patients and then you're also getting the medical knowledge by talking to the physician throughout the documentation process. And then research is a big one. The type of research varies. Some people join labs to do like wet lab research, and then a lot of people get involved in clinical research. Some other people will be medical assistants, and then I've known people who have done things as random as I know one person that got into medical school, and in his gap year, he was a city bus driver.
That was unexpected.
I think that is definitely not the common part of it, but I think the increasing value is just on having life experience that you can draw upon that's going to make you a unique and mature physician.
I'm just wondering how that guy played his CV.
I wish I would have gotten to talk
I
to
was
him
a
more.
bus driver and I learned this thing.
Yeah.
Man, that's interesting. You were applying to medical school during those 2 years. So what was next?
Right. So I was applying to medical school, and I submitted an application. To give people a general idea, the first time I applied to medical school, I applied to 14 medical schools here in the U.S.
Is
And I would
average
say
or?
average is around 20 medical schools, I would say. So it's slightly less than average. Maybe I was a little too cocky. I don't know. I think people, you don't know how hard it is until you go through the process, or how like competitive your application is going to be. And I received a few interviews from schools, but ultimately the process of the interview, like that's from the time you submit your application to the time you go through the interview process and then eventually get notified whether you're going to go to school, it takes about a year. So eventually I found out that I wasn't going to get a spot in medical school, and had the privilege to sit down with a couple of people from different admissions committees and someone who worked at my undergrad university, and identify areas where maybe I could work on. But the big thing that I realized is just that I needed to be following my passions a little bit more, and those are the things that are going to shine in interviews, and those are the things that bring you joy. So why not take those on? So I started getting more involved in volunteering at the free clinic close to me. Immediately, I actually switched jobs and became a medical scribe, just to learn a little bit more about a different field of medicine. And then ultimately, I ended up in Panama working with Nikita at our organization, Floating Doctors, out in the
Yeah,
Caribbean coast of Panama.
probably the most interesting and
Yeah,
fulfilling the part.
I would 100%. I'm grateful for those other jobs because I do think I learned a lot in them that'll help me, that have already helped me in medical school. But nothing has contributed to my life experience like the work that we did in Panama, for sure.
Thank you for sharing all of these
Hmm.
things. So I was a witness of this process in Panama when you were applying to medical school for the second time.
Yes.
And I saw you wearing a suit and a tie among tropical jungles during your interview. So I did this basically the same thing that year because I also was applying to medical residency back then. So I did the same thing, wearing suit in Panamanian heat and humidity. So it was a little bit tough to apply to medical school in the United States. What are the requirements? So exams and additional things, something like personal statement. Do you need it?
Yeah, I can touch on that. So your full undergrad coursework, so all of the grades of all your undergrad, that's going to be sent off to medical schools with like a cumulative GPA. Your MCAT score, and your MCAT has to be taken within 3 years of your getting into medical school. So I retook my MCAT again when I reapplied to medical school, which is not fun. I would not recommend that. You have to have a personal statement, like you mentioned. Typically, they leave it pretty broad. I think the prompt is like, what makes you interested in, why do you want to attend medical school? So you could talk about really anything. Typically people will draw on a couple of their experiences and then talk about how that influenced them to go into medicine. You need letters of recommendation from uh, the number of letter recommendations varies by school, but typically they'll always want one of your science professors from your pre-medical coursework, and then they'll want a non-science professor. So typically that's someone like a physician that you have either shadowed or volunteered with or worked with. That goes out to all the schools that you apply to. It's like a common application sort of thing. But then each individual school has their own application that they send you. We call this secondary applications, which is the pain of my existence. And they range from, short ones are like 200-word essays maybe. And some of the longer ones that I did were like 500-word essays. And I did that for 18 schools. So you can do the math of how many essays that that eventually adds up to.
Do they specify something like what do they want to hear from
Yeah,
you in this essay?
they give you prompts for each essay. So some common ones are what makes you a unique applicant for XYZ school. Other common ones are talk about a time that you failed and how you overcame that, or talk about like a memorable patient interaction that you had. They just want to learn more about you and make sure that your motivations for going to medical school are what they expect. And then also, because it's so competitive, they're just looking for honestly some uniqueness and variety in their applicants. So, I could have been a great applicant beforehand, but I do think going to Panama and working there, every single interview that I had, people wanted to ask me a lot about that experience. So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
that helped.
I had the same thing. So every interviewer is interested in this experience in Panama. A couple of words about MCAT. So I remember it consists of like 4 different parts, like biology, just briefly mention,
Mm-hmm.
so our listeners know and have some understanding what this exam is about.
So the MCAT is 4 parts, 90 minutes each. I think it's like 60 questions roughly.
Is it one day?
All in one day, yeah.
All in one
So
day.
the total exam is about 7 hours, taken on a Friday or Saturday. And the first part is your chem, and we call it chem phys for chemistry and physics section. And then the next section is what's called CARS, and that stands for critical analysis and reasoning section. It's a series of passages which can be about anything. Some of them are about arts, history, humanity, ethics, philosophy, and then you read through those, and then you have like generally comprehension questions to answer about them. And then the next section is a biology and biochemistry section, and the final section is a psychology and sociology section.
Okay, that's interesting. The most interesting part for me personally is this second, critical thinking and reasoning. So as a Russian medical student doctor from Russia, I think that is something that we are missing in our application process. So basically, to go to the medical school, we just need to take, what was that, biology, chemistry, and Russian language.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a score, the whole score accumulation of all these 3 scores. And this is basically what you need to go to medical school in Russia. So you don't do personal statement, you don't do these essays, you don't do anything. You will be just accepted or rejected just based on your score on your state exams. So
The applicant doesn't have to write anything.
no. And I believe, again, and I guess many people will agree with me. Well, people from Russia, medical students and doctors, that this part, for example, personal statement or this essay, is something that we really need. Because, well, you can share whatever you want in personal statement, basically. Something that is not on your CV, so just show your personality. This is one part. But the second part of this document, I believe, when you write it, well, especially if you really write it with all attention, helps you to understand what you really want.
Mm-hmm.
Well, especially when we talk about residency, I can talk about this process. It helps you to understand, and it was the case with me, for example, I was choosing between internal medicine and pediatrics. And when I started to write personal statement, I clearly saw that I have a lot of words, and these words are coming easily to my head, and I have a lot of examples about pediatrics. So that was my decision to go to pediatrics, because I thought, like, well, about internal medicine, well, I'm interested in this field, but why it's so difficult to come up with this idea to show what you really want to do. I think it's very important document for medical school, for medical residency, well, in my opinion, and something that we really need, I guess, in Russia to
I
apply.
agree. I had a very similar experience, Nikita, and I didn't know that about your application, but through my first time writing application, I just noticed like how much I talked about my volunteer experiences or abroad experiences with like patients in Latin America or from Latin America. And I was like, why do I not have more of this experiencing? Why am I not pursuing that further? And then that's kind of what led me to ultimately go to floating doctors in Panama. So it can be a really valuable tool for the applicant. I 100% agree.
Personal statement, MCAT, essays. What was the most difficult part for you personally?
Man, I think the essay, the secondary essays, because they will send them all to you within a month of each other. And so this actually happened while I was in Panama, because I got my first secondary essays sent to me at the end of June, and then my last one sent to me the first week of August. So basically within the span of 3 months while I was, doing this high intensity job on the side, I probably wrote over 100 essays in that time span. And it's just, and they're very reflective essays. You want to take your time with it. You know that the people reading this on the other side are going to determine whether you're getting into medical school or not getting into medical school. So that was the most stressful part for me.
Yeah, I could see pain in your eyes when you just started answering my question. Yeah, after all these submissions, after all these essays, you get your interviews, and then after interviews, get invitations. Is it correct to say that once you get an invitation, you have your spot 100%?
Correct.
Yeah, and then you just choose, like, if you have 3 invitations, 4 invitations, you just choose whatever you want.
Correct. So eventually once you get to April, you have to narrow down your invitations or acceptances to 3.
Yeah.
And then the following month, you have to make a decision about which one you want. But yeah, when school accepts you, you have that spot until you decide you don't want it, which is really.
And eventually you chose Creighton University School of Medicine campus at Phoenix, Arizona. Is it based on some hospital or something? Pre-existing hospital, I mean.
For us, we are right next to what's called St. Joseph's Hospital. It's not a Creighton hospital, but we have a direct affiliation. Some of the practicing physicians there are our teachers here at the medical school. And then we're also affiliated with another hospital called Valleywise Hospital, which is about 10 minutes away from us. And that's a community or county-run hospital. Receives a lot of the underinsured patients here in the Phoenix area.
I remember that your class is a little bit special. It's 5 years instead of usual 4 years. So 4 years is a usual length, and you have an additional 5th year, which is an MPH, Masters of Public Health.
So I have 120 students in my class. Of the 120 students, only 6 of those students, including myself, are in this program.
These 6 spots, I guess they're more competitive than other spots.
Yes, but not necessarily in like a getting into medical school part of way. I had to do 2 separate interviews once I had already been accepted to Creighton, but they're more competitive in the sense of they're looking more at what can you bring to a global health master's, a global career in global health.
Well, I guess with your brilliant CV with Panama mentioned in it, it was easy to bring something like some brilliant ideas to these interviews.
So that this program in general, it's a 5-year program, like Nikita said. and it's actually broken up. I have 2 years where I'm in my preclinical work. So I'm in the classroom pretty much all the time right now studying. And then before I start my hospital experiences, I will take essentially a break from medical school where I'm no longer with the medical school, and I will do a master's in public health curriculum. And then I will go and I will resume medical school. In addition to all this, with my program specifically, and this is not common, it is common to have like what we call MD MPH programs, and that's similar structure no matter where you go. What's unique to Creighton's program is it is specifically global health focused. And so I started my medical school with a week-long experience in the Dominican Republic, where we address topics in global health and get to know some of the communities there. And then throughout my medical school education, I have the chance to pick from a range of partner sites from the Dominican Republic to Ecuador to Nepal. So a bunch of different countries. And then 4 different times I'll go back to that same site within my 5 years, typically for 3 to 4 weeks at a time, and work with the medical school there to do a research project.
So you will go back to Dominican Republic like 3-4 times more.
Yeah, I still have, everyone starts in the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
But then you have the chance to pick your site afterwards. So
do you know what would you like to pick?
I think I would like to be in the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
I really like, yeah.
I was thinking probably you will choose Dominican Republic, but then my second thought was like, maybe it's too much of Latin America for you. And you, well, these travels to Dominican Republic or whatever, Ecuador, who pays for it?
It's a great question. So I received a scholarship to be in this program. And there are several scholarships opportunities available for medical students. To talk about my program specifically, I have 50% of my tuition paid for my medical school years, and then 100% of my tuition paid for during my master's in public health year. And then all of my immersion experiences to these other countries are paid for. So my flight there, my lodging, my food. Yeah, it's like the best deal ever.
You're the luckiest guy.
I'm very lucky.
Well, you work hard, so it's just 100% deserve, I have no doubt. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So you will take this master's curriculum 1 year after your second year, after your preclinical studies.
Yeah.
Do you think like it's a little bit of disruption? Can it influence your performance in medical school?
100%. That was one of my concerns that I was discussing with the director here before I decided to accept the spot. I think you learn a lot in those first 2 years, and then you're expected to come into your third year and have a very good knowledge base of what you learned in your first 2 years of medical school. However, I think it does put just a little bit more responsibility on myself to continue to review the information that I learned in the first couple of years. I think it, obviously I'm in the situation right now, so I'm going to try and look at it from glass half full, a positive lens. But I now have a whole extra year to be able to prepare to get into the hospital. So as part of that preparation, while I'm doing my master's in public health, I hope to be in the hospital shadowing, working with some physicians.
I was going to talk about USMLE a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
In the United States, you take step 1 after second year.
Yeah, you take it after your second year. And that's the traditional structure. There have been some schools across the country that are changing that a little bit, but my school is still with the traditional structure of after your first 2 years, you take step 1. And then after your second year or third year, you take step 2.
They are changing it to take it earlier or later?
Yeah, I'll just give you a comparison of some other schools that I was looking at. Oregon Health and Science University is the medical school in Portland where I'm from. They have a bit of a shortened preclinical curriculum. So they start around the same time that I do, but then they finish their curriculum about 3 months earlier than Creighton does. And then so they would take step one about 3 months earlier. And so there are some schools that are doing that. One of the most unique ways to do it is at University of Miami, and that's actually another school that I was considering. And I don't want to speak bad about it. There are different preferences for everybody, but the way they have decided to do it is do your preclinicals, and they also have a shortened preclinical curriculum. I think it's like 15 months total, and then put you into the hospital. You do your core clerkships, your rotations through the hospital, and then you take both step one and step two back to back.
That's really interesting. Well, just 15 months of preclinical. It's pretty short, I guess.
They give you 12 weeks, no, 10 weeks total. So you can use that time to study. Generally, schools will give you at least, 6 weeks or so to study of dedicated study time for each exam. So it's a little bit compressed. I think the way that they market it is that it's especially useful for people wanting to go into more competitive specialties who are very brilliant students, I would say, because the advantage is that now that step one is pass fail, if you feel like you're very prepared to take step one, maybe you can take it, 1 week of studying.
Okay.
Obviously, like you're studying, more throughout, but like 1 week of preparation, dedicated study time to that. And then you have a full 9 weeks to try and boost your step two score to as high as it can possibly be. Versus if students are preoccupied about passing step one, but they don't really want to get a very competitive specialty, and they're not as concerned about their step two score, they can spend a lot of time preparing for step one and then make sure they pass step one and then go to step two. This is what was told to me. Whether I believe that or not,
that would be impossible for me to take these two steps. And American students, they just prepare for this USMLE throughout their curriculum, I guess. So
exactly,
you just basically you know everything what you need to know, and you just need some dedicated time to like compress all this knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to, sometimes some people need to study all these things like from zero, because many people come up with this idea to go to the United States to take USMLE after medical school, or like during 5th or 6th year. And that's 6th year, it's like the length of curriculum of medical school in Russia. And basically during your 6th year, you don't remember anything about biochemistry or something like that. So yeah, many people just start preparing from zero. That's the huge difference. Well, so you will be taking your step one after your 2nd year, then you will have your MPH 1 year, then you will go back to your medical school. Is there a specific place for MPH? Will it be another city? Obviously, you won't spend the whole year in Dominican Republic. Where will it be?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I theoretically I could, because our MPH program is unique that it's entirely online and it's mostly asynchronous. So there are rarely like mandatory times where I need to be online. Most of it is all self-study primarily. I could be here in Phoenix. Maybe I'll go home to Portland. Maybe I'll come visit Nikita wherever Nikita is and do work there for a little bit.
Yeah.
Or maybe, so we have some students right now. One of them who's in Ecuador. He is in Ecuador the entire year. We have a couple other students in their MPH year right now who are in Europe for the entire year. One of them is doing internship with a global surgery organization, and then another one is working with like the WHO. So basically taking on some other internships or extracurriculars while we're studying to help boost that that CV in the long run. Yeah.
Was this MPH, and especially prioritizing of global health, was it something that made you choose this specific medical school?
Yes. It was very hard for me to choose a medical school. So ultimately, I had to decide what is going to be most important for me. And this program was very unique and special, and I thought gave me the best chance to be the type of doctor that I wanted to be.
Yeah, that's great. And a question about the book Health Gap.
Yeah.
I'm still on this book. I'm a terribly slow reader. So I'm still reading this book. Did it actually influence you a lot?
Yeah. I mean, I think it opened my eyes to what can be done. I think everyone has their calling in medicine, where you feel like you can make a difference. But for me, I think about if I really want to make a difference in my patients' lives, there's only so much that I can control, in a singular doctor's visit or singular procedure. And there's a lot of health trends that leave people more susceptible to disease or more without access to these resources that can help them. And that idea kind of fascinated me. And then, obviously being able to be in Panama and see that in real life, is pretty
Yeah,
impactful.
it was like that. You just read this book, and then you just look outside of your casita,
Yeah.
and you see all these things that are written in this book. That was my first idea. It was like MPH and global health and health gap. Probably there should be a connection between these two things. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about the curriculum. How it looks, how does it look like? What classes do you have right now? I mean, anatomy, histology, or something else. In one day, you have different classes, or do you go for 2 weeks at the same, like some kind of rotation that we
Yeah.
see in clinical years?
It's more like that, the second one that you mentioned. We have it separated by block. We call it blocks, and that's mainly by organ system. So I had like a foundations block, which goes over biochemistry and a couple other things. That was like the intro to medical school. But then we get into immunology and hematology was one block, and then I just finished my infectious disease block. And then this block is my musculoskeletal and skin block.
Do you study anatomy and then pathology right away?
Yeah, it's all integrated.
Okay,
So now that we're in
that's cool.
musculoskeletal, I'm finally into the anatomy labs. We have a cadaver lab here at Creighton, um, and so 3 days a week we're doing dissections in the lab, and then we have lectures outside of that focus on the pathology and histology and all that fun stuff. MSK is one of our longest blocks. It's 7 weeks total. And as far as the grading structure goes, I don't know how much you care about this. It's really separated by weeks, which I think makes it nice. Is they try and give us a quiz every Friday that covers all the material that we learned that week, and then we'll have our cumulative final exam at the end of the block. But it helps that we're being tested on it constantly each week to make sure that we're learning the material
Is
that
it
we're supposed to learn.
is it called shelf exam, or shelf exam is something different?
Shelf exam is what the end of block exam, but for clinicals. I'm in my fourth block right now, and I'll have 8 total in my first year, and then I think it's 7 in my second year. So
Okay.
15
So
total.
do you feel overwhelmed at this point, or do you like enjoy it and absorb everything you can?
Well, I think both of those can be true. There are moments where I feel overwhelmed because it is a lot. It's a lot of information, but I am enjoying what I'm learning Pretty much always. Every block, you're going to enjoy some blocks more than others. But no matter what it is, I mean, I feel very lucky. You think about there's people that go to work every day and hate their jobs. And then there's also people that are on the streets and, don't know where their life is going. And I'm sitting here trying to figure out, if the innervation to the subscapularis is cut off, what is my arm going to look like, or is this bacteria gram negative or gram positive, and what antibiotic do I need to use? Like these are things that interest me, and my sole purpose right now is to figure that out. So I am enjoying what I do quite a bit. Yeah.
Oh, I remember all this stuff about gram positive and gram negative. So basically, yeah, you said your life is predetermined. So you know that your life is going from glycolysis to Krebs cycle.
Yes.
Can you tell how does your day look like? Like what time you wake up, and then what you do?
Well, I'll just start with what this past week looked like. So past week, we show up on Monday morning and we're expected to take an exam over. When I say exam, it counts for like 0.5% of our grade, like barely anything. But they give us some videos and some material that we're supposed to review the night before. We come in Monday morning, we take the exam. It's primarily on the anatomy that we're expected to learn for that day. And then I go into the anatomy lab, and it's about
what time?
8 a.m. I'm expected to be, showed up on campus in the anatomy lab from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m. or to 12 p.m. Excuse me, not that long. And then I have usually a 1 hour break for lunch. Typically, they try and fill these things with like club meetings and stuff, so it never seems like a break. And then I have 2 lectures after that in the afternoon, 1 hour lectures. Medical school, it's becoming much more common here in the US to make lectures optional. I don't know how much you know about that, Nikita.
Well, I've heard about it, and I think that's a brilliant idea because, well, I'm not sure about every medical school in Russia right now, but basically, I would say 99% of my listeners, especially medical students and doctors, they will agree with me that we pay a lot of attention to lectures in Russia, unfortunately. I believe, and well, it's not just my opinion. It's there are some studies that show that lectures are one of the most useless types, like of educational process. So yeah, so it's reasonable to at least make them optional. And I'm not talking about to remove all these lectures from curriculum, because sometimes some lecturers can be really interesting. So they just maybe not teach you something that you can read, but they can show you some cool stuff and help you with your studying, just like uplifting you.
Yeah. So typically what I do, sometimes I will go to lecture if I'm feeling like I need the structure or I need to be around people, but most of the time I don't go to lecture, and I'll watch the lecture. I will watch the lecture recorded, but the nice thing is that I can put it on 2 times speed, and so I can skip the parts where I'm like not super concerned about it. And then when I get to something that's critical, I can pause it, and then I can like go to my other resources that I have, or I can, Google or chat GPT something to like help me understand something. Or right now,
Be careful with ChatGPT.
Yeah, careful with chat GPT. I've gotten burned before. But right now, like in anatomy, what's been really helpful, we have this application that's called Complete Anatomy, which is really cool for being able to like add layers of muscle or take layers of muscle off, add arteries, veins, spin the body around. It's just like a 3D model of what the body looks like. So I'll be watching lecture, and then I'll pause it and I'll go into this application, make sure that I can identify the structures for myself. And like you mentioned, it gives the power for students to take learning into their own hands, and I think that it helps me understand much more this way. Or the other option that I can do is I just watch the lecture on 2 times speed, and I don't even really try and learn the info. I just try and get familiar with it enough so that when I go to do my Anki, it's not the first time that I'm seeing this term. And that's another strategy.
Yeah. So lectures in afternoon. So what time, if you go to all these lectures, what time is your final time when you go back to home? Or
it depends. You have sometimes it's 3 p.m. I would say most of the time it's at 5 p.m. The other thing that we have is we also incorporate a clinical skills education into our preclinical weeks as well. So once every other week, I have 4 hours of instruction with physicians, and we go over clinical skills that are relevant to our block. So I learned how to do shoulder and a knee exam this past week. And then with that clinical skills, we have paid actors that come in and play standardized patients for us.
That's so cool. I just this sounds like a perfectly integrated system. Everything is intertwined. I would say that's the best option for education. Unfortunately, I didn't I didn't have something like that in my medical school, but I think it's something that really helps you to
Yes,
to be interested in all these stuff.
I agree, because every time I get done with that, I remind myself okay, this is the reason that we're learning this information. And it's drilling into us from the very beginning. Before I even learned anything in medical school, they were drilling into us how to take a patient history and working on that and giving us an outline of what that looks like. And that when it comes to getting a patient history, when we actually have a solid differential diagnosis in mind that we're trying to narrow down, we don't lose the fundamentals of the things that we're supposed to be asking, which I appreciate that.
So my next question may be a little bit more like a joke, but my listeners from Russia, medical students and doctors again, they will understand this question. Do you study Latin language?
No, I don't study Latin language. However, they did put a resource on our online drive that said a helpful anatomy or helpful Latin to study for anatomy.
Okay,
I haven't
that
reviewed it
makes
yet.
sense. Yeah, so back I still that there it's still the part of the curriculum in medical schools of Russia. We study, well, they call it Latin. Basically, that's just the part of Latin that will help you to understand all these terms, but it's too much. I think somehow we even studied how to what was it called, like in Spanish when you change the verbs.
Conjugating
Yeah, conjugating verbs, conjugating nouns, and
in
all
Latin.
this stuff in Latin. Yes. So I felt like it's too much, and I think many people will agree on this with me. It helped me in one way, that just if you take Latin word and you just read it with rules of English language, you get the English term. And it helped me when I started to prepare for USMLE, because I basically knew all the terms for, I don't know, anatomical and other stuff. It was easier for me to dive into all this terminology in English, because basically I knew all this stuff already. But otherwise, it's just useless, and useless span of time. And I have no idea why they still keep it in curriculum, because it sounds like awful. And on top of that, we have English, which is basically super nice. because like you cannot do anything with in medicine right now without knowing English. So keeping English in curriculum is a nice thing. Latin is something like, I don't know. Well, maybe many people will agree with me, but some people will tell like, well, this is something classical and old style and we want it. But well, everyone has their own opinion, and well, it's just, I don't know. For me, it's just a waste of time. So no Latin. That's good.
No Latin, no Latin for us.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like it maybe have helped you a little bit, but I can empathize with that because I'm learning as a medical student. It's not, will something help you? It's will the amount of effort put into something get you like the amount of return that you want? Because your medical school education is so busy. There's so many ways that you can, invest time into it. You have to think about the return you're getting out of it.
Many people question, for example, why do we study this Krebs cycle? Anybody who needed Krebs cycle during there, but might think of that. And if I get questions like that, why do we need that? Well, my thought, maybe some things are really redundant in medical school, but you never know what you will need in future. So maybe somehow you will do some study on some things, and you will really need your knowledge of Krebs cycle, maybe not in details, but at least you know that this thing exists.
Right.
And you can come up with a brilliant idea how to connect. Like, for example, you have a drug, you have this consequence, and then you're like, maybe it's just because that Krebs cycle that I don't remember details about this Krebs cycle, but you have an understanding, and this may help you in future. But still, with Latin language, I cannot figure out something useful about this Latin language, especially conjugations. Just one question about USMLE. Have you already started to like thinking and preparing for step one?
So we talk about it in our classes of like, this is going to be important for your USMLE exams.
Okay, your professors mentioned that, right? So this is important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, our professors will tell us like, well, this is a favorite of the USMLE to test, so
yeah. High yield.
And then the other thing that's incorporated into our education, we have these things called case-based learning, where we're given a case that we go over with a group of like 8 people. So like this past week, it was all about the different types of burns was one of them. And then another one, which is so ridiculous, pemphigus vulgaris and bullous pemphigoid. So they talk to us all about like the intricacies of that and how to differentiate between them, because apparently it shows up on boards. So they do some of that stuff, and then some of it still comes on the onus of the student. So I was just talking to a third-year medical student last night, actually, and he was telling me that he would recommend once I get to the second part of my first year, so into January, I should start doing like the step 1 Anki deck and just doing, like 30 cards a day or something like that to try and keep things fresh and learning. So
I think these words will resonate with many of my listeners. So many of them are on step USMLE path. You haven't seen patients yet, right? So you will see them during your third year.
Right. There are some opportunities where I can see patients. So like on Friday, through volunteer opportunities, I got to do just like a basic intake for a patient, because we went to a shelter that treats primarily people that are on the streets and homeless here in Phoenix. And so I did a patient intake for him. And then this coming week, we have what's called our early hospital experience. And this has become very common throughout all medical schools. So I think every medical school that I looked at does this to at least some degree, but I have half a day where I'm going to shadow trauma surgery. I have to be to the hospital at 5:30 in the morning on Thursday morning, which I'm not excited about, but I'll spend the day with actually a third year medical student who's on that surgery rotation then, and just, watching what they do. So that probably won't be seeing any patients, but they're trying to get us integrated into healthcare. Yeah.
What we started from when I mentioned that one of my professors said, we teach on patient's bedside, and Americans don't do that. So can you confirm, or should we just say that that guy was completely wrong? So you will see patients.
Yes. And I will say though, that's been a change in focus. I think historically in U.S. medical education, it was like that, where there wasn't really an emphasis on seeing patients until you got to the third year of medical school. And now they recognize we have a bunch of awkward doctors that don't know how to talk to patients, and they're trying to really emphasize the need for good patient connection and stuff like that.
Yeah, let's say that professor just had outdated information from these or 70s.
Exactly. Outdated information.
Outdated information. I really hope that he will hear my podcast. Definitely not. And will change his mind. You're now on campus. So
yes.
We previously, before started this podcast, I talked to Dillon and he showed me the place where he's at right now. So can you just show us this little place?
So I'm on the 4th floor of our medical building here, and we have these rooms that we can reserve. And then if I go this way,
so this is a cool, quiet, clean, personal room for studying. And if you have these rooms in your medical school, you just must study. Am I correct?
Well, you still have to focus, but yeah, it makes it a lot easier to come here. I told Nikita that I left where I'm living, and I wanted to come here so I could focus on getting some schoolwork done after our podcast today. So it is a huge advantage, I would say, to be able to come here and study, and then also to be able to study with other people in a private room like this is helpful too.
Yeah, so it's really helpful, and this is something that I wanted to be in my medical school, because dedicated space for study is something that is really need in medical schools of Russia. Well, maybe some medical schools already have these things, especially in Moscow. I bet they have these things, but other medical schools, no. Well, my last question: any advice for people who are pursuing their path in the United States? So my friends who are IMGs and they want to work in the United States. Anything from your perspective.
My
that, or just forget about our dreams.
No, my advice is that the United States is as culturally diverse as a country as any in the world, I would say, and so we could really benefit from having doctors that not only bring their experiences from their home country, but I think especially someone like Nikita, who and he didn't pay me to say this, I promise. Someone like not only brings his education from his home country, but has spent time in other countries and can better connect with patients that live in our country that maybe someone like myself or another doctor can't necessarily connect with. And then the other thing I would say is that it's hard for everybody. U.S. medical education, it is designed to help us to get into residencies here in the U.S., but no matter where you are, whether you're in Russia or Argentina or United States, it's hard. But we're all in this together, and we all have like similar goals and passions. And personally, like I think doing stuff like this and sharing, how our experiences are, and sharing the resources that we've used. We need more stuff like this, because there can be a culture of being very competitive and really wanting your spot, but it doesn't have to be that way. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Dillon. There was
Thank
a
you, Nikita,
really fruitful conversation, and I hope we go back to this conversation someday and you will share new insights and your excitement about working with patients, working in Dominican Republic.
I would love that. Hopefully we get some fun updates at some point. Thank you for having me, Nikita, and thank you for
Of
anyone
course.
listening onto this podcast. It's been great. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.